webinar of the economy of Francesco.
Everything that you did to the smallest of my brothers, you did for me. This is what animates everything that I do.
Of the economy of Francesco.
Everything that you did to the smallest of my brothers, you did for me. This is what animates everything that I do.
Of the economy of Francesco.
Everything that you did to the smallest of my brothers, you did for me. This is what animates everything that I do.
Of the economy of Francesco.
Everything that you did to the smallest of my brothers, you did for me. This is what animates everything that I do.
Of the economy of Francesco.
Everything that you did to the smallest of my brothers, you did for me. This is what animates everything that I do.
Of the economy of Francesco.
Everything that you did to the smallest of my brothers, you did for me. This is what animates everything that I do.
Of the economy of Francesco.
Everything that you did to the smallest of my brothers, you did for me. This is what animates everything that I do. Everything that you did to the smallest of my brothers, you did for me. This is what animates everything that I do. Everything that you did to the smallest of my brothers, you did for me. This is what animates everything that I do.
All right, and here we are. So I'm not sure what happened with the audio of the video. I'm sure there was some technical glitch because the video was great, but the audio was not great. Anyways, great to see you all and welcome. Thank you for deciding to invest your time to grow as an individual and as a professional through this new webinar, part of the economy of Francesco. By way of a very quick introduction, my name is Francesco Tronci. I'm an engineer. I'm a Harvard MBA. I currently work in finance in private equity, but I'm also a volunteer for a range of different nonprofits, mainly focused on education, talent, international exchanges, and emerging markets. And of course, also for the economy of Francesco. So for me, it's very interesting to be here today together with you. And as you can see, a very interesting group of speakers, which I'm going to introduce in a minute. But first, just a couple of housekeeping announcements. So I'll do my best to moderate and to highlight the questions from the audience. So feel free to write them in the chat on YouTube. And we have some volunteers who will pick several questions to ask to the speakers and point them out to me. Also, we have some volunteers which will be providing translations in Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. And you will find the links to follow them in the chat at the bottom of the YouTube video. So I want to thank all the volunteers, including the translators and the whole economy of Francesco and our village Vocation and Profit for making this event possible. And as a reminder, if you're a speaker and would like to intervene, of course, remember to turn on your mic. And also, if you're one of the young participants who will also be asking questions live, you can feel free to turn on your video whenever you want to get on stage. So I will ask now some of our young participants to turn on your videos. So Ramon, Valentina, if you want to join us on stage for a moment. There you go. It's great to see you. And I know you'll be joining us later on in the conversation. So thank you for being here. And of course, also feel free to monitor the chat if you'd like and ask questions either from yourself or the rest of the community at any point. Finally, also Professor Luigino Bruni would have wanted to be here as well, but he couldn't, although he sends his regards and a note of encouragement, as he's a big supporter of today's topics. And therefore, on behalf of the whole economy of Francesco, thank you to all the volunteers and the speakers. It's great to learn from you today. We'll be ending in 90 minutes sharp, so 7:30 p.m. Central Eastern Time. And without further ado, let me kick off the conversation. Of course, I like this to be a dialogue. So I'll just get us started, but then feel free to interact even directly without necessarily waiting for me to direct traffic in the conversation. So I'm gonna start with Loughlin. So dear Loughlin, you were head of global tax at KPMG and were also part of their executive team. And after such a successful business career, you also were a co-founder of the BBB, Blueprint for a Better Business initiative. Can you tell us what it is, what's the framework, and how does it work? Just give us a sense, please.
Sure. Hi, Francesco, and hi, everyone else. Lovely to be here today. Actually, Francesco, it was my business career that led me to being the co-founder of Blueprint. And this may be a common story. What was apparent to me was that busy being a successful leader, leading a successful business, learning the technical skills of my trade, did not give enough time to reflect on some of the more fundamental aspects about business that didn't seem to be answered. And in my business, I was very fortunate. I led my business. I consulted with other businesses, my clients, and I dealt with governments and regulators around the world. So I was very fortunate hearing different points of view as to what was working and what wasn't working, but not really the why that they weren't working so well. And at the time, I was very fortunate because I was allowed to experiment and try different things as I was trying to lead the business. But two topics I never resolved until I retired. And the first was, what was really the role of business in society? Because it was clearly beyond profit. There was something else that hadn't been explained. And secondly, what motivates people to go beyond the ordinary, to create something new with excitement when their incentives actually pointed the other way? And that intrigued me. So that's what I wanted to try and resolve. But equally, once again, my fortune was I was allowed to have influence at a global level. And my career was really different in terms of I was allowed to make difference at scale. And yet I started not going to university, whereas most of my peers did. And yet I became the leader of a global business impacting at scale. And the lovely thing about that is it took away the fear of scale. I'm still fearful, but it doesn't overwhelm me. And I brought both of those to Blueprint to actually create something new. Blueprint is a charity that essentially shows a pathway to build good at scale by helping to answer the questions about the role of business in society and what motivates people to solve worthwhile problems together. And business can choose to be a force for good in society. A bit later on, Francesco, I'll talk a bit about the how. But the true why I will share with you is my ambition to help people address and solve the problems that people face in business quicker than the 35 years it took me to get there. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for this. It's incredible how much aligned this is with the broader Economy of Francesco mission. and so we're very fortunate to have you in our group, and also Sister Helen. I mean, you've been part of this from the very start, but coming from a very different perspective than Loughlin. You're currently the Vice Rector at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas in Rome, and have been involved in several other initiatives, including the economy of Francesco. But what resonates for you about the Blueprint for a Better Business, and why is it so important to try to bridge what could be seen as a vocation for an individual, as is definitely the case for you, given what you do, with the purpose of a business, and how BBB tries to bring the two together?
Thank you very much, Francesco. It's a real honor for me to be here with all these wonderful young people who are giving such a lot of energy to an older person like me, who's tried, a bit like Loughlin, through my life to try to put some of these principles into practice. Maybe I should just say at the beginning that, a bit like Francesco, I started out as an engineer, and really my life was changed by reading an article called Engineers and the Work People Do, which showed me that we engineers were looking at things completely the wrong way round. We were designing machines and then putting people in to fill the gaps that we couldn't fill properly with our machines. And instead, we should have been looking at the people and trying to see how we could create the technology to bring the most out of the skills and talents and capacities of the human beings. So that led me to start working on a thing called human-centered technology. And then this led me to where I am now. It led me to join the Dominican Order. It led me to learn a lot about Catholic social thought, which is a fundamental set of ideas behind Blueprint for Better Business. Yeah, and I think we called our talk today Business as a Human System. And I think if we are going to really put the human person at the center, which I think is what Catholic social thought is about and what a lot of the economy of Francesco is about, we're going to have the word vocation in it somewhere, because all of us have a vocation. And we see now in business, and maybe many of our young people who are studying business or working in businesses see this now, this big movement in business to talk about purpose, which really got going after the financial crisis, when everybody was asking themselves, why? Why are we doing this? What's going wrong with the business world? And in a way, we could say that purpose is sort of like the vocation of the business system, in a way. We could see that business has a meaning that goes beyond profit making, and it's about human development, and it's about allowing life to develop. And human development meaning there in relation with the rest of creation. Human beings are stewards of creation in a healthy and ongoing relationship with the rest of the world around us. And so I think, those ideas are really behind Blueprint, and that's why we're so happy to be able to share them with young people in Economy of Francesco, especially through the lens of Vocation and Profit, which is our village offering our webinar today, because it's makes so much sense in terms of what business can do and how through Blueprint we can help move things in that direction.
That's great. That's great. And I love how both you and Loughlin had very successful and rich careers, reaching so many experiences, and then you're happy to bring them and to share them with others to try, as Loughlin was saying, to shorten the time it takes for somebody that's younger to realize all the implications of what their profession or their role in society can have on others, and maybe try to, instead of reinventing the wheel every time, trying to leverage on the learnings that you had in your career. And actually, so last but not least, let me turn to Nash. We're very fortunate to have Nash as well with us today. And so when we were talking, Nash, you're a former banker turned now entrepreneur and advisor to other entrepreneurs. So you're a founder and executive coach and consultant within your own business, after attending actually a 3-day workshop with Sister Helen and Loughlin and others regarding blueprint for a better business. So it's very interesting for us to see, what you took from the model, and then how you you developed your own vision. And when we chatted in preparing for today, you told me that your clients in some very fast-growing tech firms find that their work can be more complete, and actually their businesses can be better if they increase their business's organizational health. That's the language you used, in order to develop a company not only as far as profit goes, but also along other axes, which then ultimately become important components of the success of that business. So how do you translate what you call organizational intelligence into organizational health? And could you explain to us what you mean and why it's important for businesses to realize that?
Well, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. It's always a massive privilege to be invited and to have the chance to speak. I smile because you asked me in the beginning what I took away from the 3-day immersion that I did with Loughlin and Helen and others from the Blueprint. And I do distinctly remember leaving those 3 days just feeling really fried mentally, and just having so many burning questions that felt like they really needed answers. And I kind of got in there thinking that I might get some answers, but I left with more questions than I did answers. That did spur on some learning that actually, there is a huge value in having the right questions. The right questions are a great motivator, driver, to help us to go and search for the answers that are meaningful, the answers that connect intellectually, but also deeper than intellectually with our hearts and our whole beings. And I think that when we connect those two together, then we feel like we have the answer. So questions are a great thing. So the Blueprint immersion was very formative in helping me to formulate the right questions. You asked about organizational intelligence and organizational health. What I see and what I perceive at the moment is that there is an obsession with things that we can quantify in the realm of business. There's an obsession with particularly product development as far as tech companies are concerned, and investment readiness. I would say those are the two things that occupy most of the bandwidth of accelerator programs. They're mostly focused on how to improve your product and how do you scale using money, how do you scale using capital. And I would say that everything to do with product, to do with investment, to do with your strategy, your marketing, your sales, your technology, all of that is what I would consider to be business intelligence. And I would say that at most, business intelligence represents 50% of what it takes to build a successful organization. And the statistics kind of bear this out. If you look at Vern Harnish's book, Scaling Up, on one of the first few pages, there's a picture of a mouse, a gazelle, and an elephant. And the gazelle is supposed to represent the company that's scaling up, it's bounding forward, and then a lot of gazelles then turn into elephants because they plod along and they basically make the same mistakes and they end up failing. And a lot of mice don't end up becoming gazelles. In fact, the statistic in the book says something like, 97% of mice don't become gazelles. And it seems as an ecosystem of companies that we're almost satisfied with that statistic, that the vast majority, 97% according to this research, don't go on to succeed. And I think that this is an indication that we are focused, I wouldn't say in the wrong place, but our focus is not sufficient. It's too limited to the intelligence side of the business. All of the things that I described, product, technology, strategy, marketing, sales, etc. And these are the tangible, the quantifiable sides of the business. And because we have a bias for the quantifiable, I think we tend to overlook that which is less easy to quantify, but can be quantified nonetheless. And when I talk about organizational intelligence, I simply mean, how do you bring all of the intelligence of a business and bring it to bear in the real marketplace? It constitutes everything from our identity as a company, what is our purpose as an organization. I should say that, the blueprint have been very much part of my evolution and my thinking. So you'll see a lot of correlation between what I'm saying and what Loughlin and Helen are saying. So part of organizational health is, in my language, it's really about understanding, well, why do we exist? If business doesn't exist to make a profit, and profit is a byproduct, then what is that purpose that drives business? And once we understand that purpose, then how does that reflect into our strategy? Because, I often ask entrepreneurs a question, what is the purpose of strategy? And they give a various answers. But I think the answer is quite simple. The purpose of strategy is to actually fulfill the purpose. And so then we have to align our purpose and our decisions and our direction. So another aspect of organizational health is, how do we change what we do to be aligned with our purpose? How do we have coherence between those things? Another aspect might be our vision, the behaviors that drive us in towards achieving our purpose, what many people call the values. And we could go beyond that and say, do we have clarity about what's most important in the next 90 days as an entrepreneur? Oftentimes I sit around with executive teams and I ask them the question, okay, what is your single biggest strategic priority in the business for the next 90 days? And I invite everybody to write down their answers. And more often than not, what I get is a range of different answers. Oftentimes I get as many answers as there are people in the room. So while you might have all of the intelligence of the business, if people aren't seeing the direction to be in the same place, if they don't understand what the single most important strategic priority is in the business for the next 90 days, which is a short-term horizon, then what chance have we got of translating the product and the intelligence and the investment into value on the ground? And so organizational health to me is like the wind that drives the wind turbine. The turbine is, it requires intelligence sciences to know the geology of the rock, where to place it, the engineering to manufacture the thing, how to translate the energy that it generates into power, and so on. These are all the intelligence aspects of the wind turbine. But without wind, the turbine doesn't generate any value. It's potential value. And that's what intelligence is, it's potential value. But without the organizational health, the cohesion, the clarity, the health of team dynamics, being able to operate as a high-performing team, without understanding what your purpose is and how that reflects into your strategy, without making decisions that are aligned and so on, you get this huge failure rate. You get a huge failure rate of companies that have all of the quote-unquote ingredients of success, but yet are not succeeding. And so to me, organizational intelligence is the missing link between, real success in business. And when I say success, and I say real success, I mean success in 3 dimensions. We cannot have just rampant growth and profit if people are getting burnt out, exhausted, and breaking apart in their relationships at the same time. That's not real success. We can't have success unless there's social value being created at the core of the business, not as a peripheral activity on the side. When I worked for the investment banking world, it was very much about core business and then social responsibility, 2 distinct sets of activities. And one of them got a very small piece of the pie and the other got the vast majority of the attention. And to me, that doesn't work as a business model. That's not driving success if the social value and the business model are disconnected from one another. So organizational health is like, is the bridge that connects us back. It's what enables us to leverage and translate that intelligence into value in the ground.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So, Loughlin, going deep diving a little bit more. So we understand why the blueprint for a better business is important, and you all gave 3 different points of views that put our attention to the topic. But can you explain a little bit more, how blueprint is designed, how it can provide a pathway for businesses to contribute to a better economy, and perhaps even how it tries to approach the potential gap between purpose and profit?
Sure. Now I'm going to ask my long-term colleague and assistant. Thank you so much, Helen. Coming back to what Nash was talking about, I think we agree that you cannot have a healthy business without healthy people and a healthy society. And that thinking is what drives the design principles of Blueprint, which I will explain. So the design principles start with business is a series of relationships. It's essentially human. It's not just simply contracts. Contracts are shaped by the humanity. Business rules and what is expected are created and shaped by society for the good of society, not business shaping society for its own ends. Business as a collection of people in their formation and their development as people acts as a social institution, and therefore they should contribute to the development and formation of people. And importantly, we need to understand the complexity of people, but a way to describe them, we call the duality, is as humans, we are self-interested. That is not the same as selfish. It's self-interested to make sure our basic needs are looked after, from which we have a platform to be whole, which is to seek meaning, to be in relationship and care for others. So the two are interconnected. I cannot care if I'm in fear, but once I'm out of fear, I'm released to be my whole. And finally, what we would sum up as our guiding principles is each person is a someone worthy of dignity, not as something to be exploited, which goes right back to Helen's original view around engineering and machines and their relationship. And finally, picking up on Nash's point, true value is delivered by serving society, and serving society delivers true value. So those are our design principles. And let me go on to something you talked about, Francesco, the relationship between vocation and profit. Is there a tension there? Does one corrupt the other? And we would say no. What we have tried to do as part of Blueprint is to explore and give meaning to words. I will be frank with you, it's deficient because it's in English, but it gives you a platform to see how looking at words and exploring them can give you stronger meaning. So let's start with profit. Profit is generally seen to be financial gain, but profit also means to benefit from. If you then think about profit in its wider context of value, once again, people will narrowly look to its financial value, which is essential to invest and sustain a business. But also, you need to create social value, which is also necessary to sustain the business, because the business creates the opportunity both for meaningful work, but also to produce goods that are truly good and services that truly serve. Now, the issue is, if you follow the narrow side of financial gain and financial value, you have no need of vocation, because you can drive that value simply by contract and extrinsic rewards. I will give you something in exchange for what I want. So if you only think narrowly about financial value and financial gain, you don't get to talk about vocation. But if you realize the true extent of the potential of the business is to create gain and benefit and financial value and social value, you absolutely need vocation, because that goes beyond profit to joy and desire. So let's move to vocation. And vocation, we would say as well, is it's a call or a summons. And Helen talked about it at the beginning. There are two calls and summons. There are to ourselves, our personal meaning, our quest to find out who we are at our fullest potential. So there's a question of awareness, accountability for looking for that, and a sense of agency that we use that to make a difference. So that's our personal meaning. The other side of vocation is where you have a collective, like a company, which brings people together and actually explains why they should come together. But what it effectively does to work is to create a platform for people to nurture, find, and develop their meaning and formation of character. So if you bring this together, what effectively business as a human system means is thinking about business with responsibilities around the formation of people as they are developing as humans, the dignity of work as a signal that work is a source of meaning, the ability to create common goods because we come together to create them is not imposed, and also seeing profit as an outcome and a participation, not something that is then taken away and given to someone else. So in our thinking, that once you expand the meaning of profit, you must go to vocation. And if you understand vocation as personal and collective, you can see business is a vehicle to create both financial and social value. And that is essential, particularly this point about creating common goods. And I don't know whether, Helen, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think I can add something quite useful at this point, because we mentioned when we were looking at the first slide that we've got this idea about duality. In a way, another way of thinking about that is to say that we're coming out of a period of history, about 250 years, where we have focused in our whole worldview on the individual. The central problem of modern philosophy became human freedom, and it was seen in a very individualistic way, and the social system and the natural environment around us became problems, potential limits on human freedom, and we had to sort of look at it it became a complex thing for us to deal with. In a way, what we're recognizing now with the problems that we have now, which are all social and systemic, social exclusion and climate change and all the other many problems that we could identify, we have to really bring back this social dimension of the human person, recognizing that we are relational as well as individual. And this slide, in a way, captures this sense of the duality, these two things which are coterminous. At the same time, we are individuated members of the species Homo sapiens sapiens. And each one of us has specific needs for food, for shelter, also for status in hierarchy structures. We need those things, and we do compete with each other for those things. And we need economics to help us get those things. Why do we have so much suffering in the world today? Why do we have so much migration, for instance? Many people are moving because they don't see enough economic output, enough possibility to found a family, to take care of their children. Most migration is economically pushed these days as well, with conflict and even worse things, but much of it is economic. So we need to have this individual needs taken care of, these sort of basic foundational needs. But if we think about what's happening in our work processes, if we think about what's going on in a business when we're trying to work together towards something, we have processes which are producing two outputs. John Paul, in his encyclical Laborum Exigens, which came out in 1981, he talked about this in terms of the what he called the objective output, which we can measure, things like the products, the profits, the policies, all those things. We can usually see them, we can certainly measure them. And what he called the subjective output, which was the change in the human beings that occurs to them as part of doing their work. And that can be positive, it can be negative, it can be all kinds of things. So all of our work processes, all of our business processes have this duality of outcome, this duality which is, on the one hand, focused on what we can call foundational goods, things which are foundational to the human life. If we don't have them, they're like the broken foundations of a house. You know, if a house doesn't have proper foundations, it falls down. And if human beings and human communities don't have enough of these kinds of goods, foundational goods, they start to break down. We start to have some fundamental problems in society. But no house is its foundation, and no community is just made up of these foundational goods. The foundations are there for something else. And that's the other side of this duality. That's the vocation, that's the purpose, that's the higher goods, what we could call the excellent goods, the human development that comes about because of what we do in business and because of the kind of contribution that business makes to society, the products that are offered that can then help other people do other things, you know. So we could see this duality there in terms of sort of foundational goods and excellent goods, which businesses are producing. And we could also see, John, this is the last thing I'll say, another way of thinking about the kinds of goods that businesses produce. We could think about profit as a foundational good and other goods like it, technology, policies, all the kinds of instruments and tools that we use to do something. We could think about them as goods which have to be allocated between people. You know, if you want to share the output of the business, its final result at the end of the year, you have to allocate it. Some of it goes to the employees, some of it goes to the investors. We might give some of it in the future to the customers with lower prices. You know, that's the only way we can share it, is allocating it. The other kind of good, though, that we're producing in business all the time is one in which we participated goods. And these are, in a way, the really powerful ones, because without participation in a shared activity, in a shared idea of the good life, in a shared idea of justice, for instance, we don't know how to allocate. We can't create properly and share properly goods like profit, like technology, like all the tools we have, unless we share in a participated good, a good which is bigger than all of us, a good in which we participate, in which we continue to grow. And so the important thing, one of the key things I'd say in Blueprint is that we always want to say there's these two dimensions. There's these two dimensions of the human person, individual and relational. Relational also means spiritual, moving out to God as well. But there's also these two dimensions of the business and of social life, of any social activity. There's it's sort of foundational goods like profit, and there's excellent goods. And then there's allocated goods and the participated goods. And we're in this world of this amazing richness of goods which are being produced. And we need to recognize it. It's a bit like what Nash was saying. We can have as much organizational intelligence as we want. If we don't have health as well to go with it, we are not going to produce the output that we produce. So all the time, in many, many things that people are saying now, we see these two dimensions coming in to what we're thinking. Okay, thank you, Loughlin.
Thank you, Helen. And we took that thinking and we wanted to make it accessible to skeptical people, because some believe, and we dispute, that the richness of thinking that Helen is talking about is reserved to a societal context. And our belief is that if you view business as a societal context, it should equally translate. And therefore what Blueprint did was produce something which is called the Blueprint 5 Principles of a Purpose-Driven Business. And if you went back to the first slide and the design principles, you will see how they're built into this framing. Essentially, it's a system. It's a system which is built as a series of relationships, not simply contracts. Its purpose is driven by serving society and actually the dignity of people. That is what drives the outcome of profit, rather than the purpose of business being for investors. So if you actually look at these design principles, what we've produced is a way to look at business in a way that business people would recognize, because they recognize the relationships with customers and suppliers. They recognize the relationships with their employees. They recognize they need to deal with communities. And increasingly, they recognize that they are bounded by a planet that they need to nurture. And what these principles do is bring those together so that as a business person, you can ask yourself, well, I like what Helen is saying, but can I make it work in business? And we would say the answer is yes. If you think about the relationships are what create the value, is the meaning of value is serving society and the dignity of people. And through creating that value, the company can participate, as Helen said, and participation is necessary to sustain the business. But equally, it's an inclusive way of thinking, because those relationships depend on mutuality. And therefore, if you look at the center, one of the main issues is enabling and welcoming public scrutiny, which is really saying that to have a relationship, you need to be in dialogue with people. Otherwise, it is not a relationship. It is a power driven by a contract. So this is what we show to people as a practical way to translate the thinking into practice. And this is a snapshot of the actions you would take. And we encourage companies to build those relevant to their company and sector. But the interesting thing and the encouraging thing is once people have understood the principles, they say to themselves, can you please tell me again, what are the sources behind this so that I'm anchored in something that I can believe in, and that reinforces my belief. So the first piece of work that Helen and I and others embarked upon was to build another systems framework to show how all the richness of what Helen is talking about could come together, the richness of the wisdom traditions, philosophy and faith, married to the emergent social sciences that were observing the human person, to see whether there was actually an overlap, so that whether you take a scientific mindset, a spiritual mindset, or a common sense mindset, you can arrive at the same place. So what I'd like to do, if I may, is ask Helen to explore with us how that richness of thinking and mindset has been laid out as yet another pathway to get to this place.
Okay, thank you very much, Loughlin. Just trying to change the slide, which is not working. Wait a minute. Oh, yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So here perhaps it's good to start with a little bit of history. As we said, after the financial crisis, there was a big soul searching amongst many people in the big business world, the global businesses, who were the ones most implicated in the crisis, especially financial businesses. And at that time, some big people, big names in the business world read the encyclical that Benedict XVI came out with in 2009 called Caritas in Veritate, which was in part an analysis of the financial crisis. It did other things as well, but that was one of the things it did. And this really struck them. And some of them said, you know, this is the most profound analysis we've come across. And they wanted to benefit from the depth of this thinking. And so they pushed, people pushed few people to get together, including me and Loughlin, to start working on this. How could we capture the thinking that was behind this encyclical and propose it to people in business so that they could use it? And so we came up in the end with this document, which is over 2 slides. This is the first part of the document, which we call the framework. And this one is looking at how do we define purpose? You know, we've got businesses in many different sectors of the economy doing many different things. How could we help all of them in this deeper way define what they are about? And the more we worked on this, the more we realized that although the starting point was that encyclical in Benedict XVI's document, it was as if it was like a huge tree with the trunk, the root went down into Catholic social thought, but it grew up and it opened out into a massive foliage which welcomes and includes many, many other religious traditions. And in fact, we've had quite an active interreligious group working around Blueprint from the beginning. Because the idea here would be that these ancient traditions that have lasted thousands of years, they know something about what it means to be human, and they can throw light on our current problems. And often we can find that modern sciences, especially the new ones like neuroscience and genetics, come up with results which are more correlated with the way those wisdom traditions see the human being than classic economic theory does, or some of the other big social science theories that we have. So the two of these sources, the wisdom traditions with the new sciences, represent thinking, as Loughlin was saying, behind this framework. And we felt that, carrying on with this idea of the duality, that there were two basic elements for defining purpose. And if you know Catholic social thought, you'll recognize these things immediately. One of them is focusing on each human person as a someone, as something valuable, not just as a thing to be either used as an employee or used as a source of income as a customer, or not just a thing, but a someone, a person who has dignity. In fact, the idea of dignity comes out of the religious traditions. You can't actually arrive at the idea of dignity from a scientific approach. You know, you could never look down a microscope or do an experiment that could show dignity. Dignity is something that has been given to us from a wisdom tradition and has now developed an idea of its life of its own beyond the wisdom tradition from which it came, which was Christianity, and can be recognized by all of us as important. So dignity is something about the value of each person. You know, ancient cultures never thought that everybody had dignity. All ancient cultures thought some people were more valuable than others. Slavery was very, very common. In fact, slavery has been a constant battle in human history, where you treat someone as a thing. And some of you come from parts of the world where we're not much beyond that, you know, where people are still very much treated as things, often in business as well. So the idea of dignity is a foundational point in the whole Blueprint approach. And the businesses who really want to move forward in terms of developing a new way of thinking about economics always resonate very much with this. Another thing that it connects with is that people are developing. We are not just some kind of fixed set of preferences, self-interested preferences, as the classic economic thinking would tell us, but we're always in development. And so we need to design business systems which allow for human development, allow for us to develop as each one of us, and also in terms of our relationships. And then the second crucial part of that, building on that, is that we are part of a common good. As businesses, we participate in the common good, this important word that we mentioned before. And what we do, what we produce, needs to serve that common good. So this idea of business as a service serving something bigger than we are, which then also gives us a financial return. So if we think about those things when we're defining purpose, then we're in this sort of world of business as a human system. Business is something which is promoting human life and human flourishing. A little bit of problem here with my slides. Okay, so this is the second half of the framework, which is expanding a bit on those two basic principles. And again, if you know Catholic social thought, you'll recognize some of the words on this slide. The first principle, solidarity. Second one, subsidiarity. Then we have two ones which have become much more important in later Catholic social thought, reciprocity and plurality. And then sustainability, one that I think was recognizable to everybody today. And the idea is that we try to use these principles in our everyday working life. You can see the title of this part of the framework is Behaviors Needed to Build Character and Achieve Purpose. We start to live, we start to put flesh on this purpose and live it. And the people who are part of living it are also developing as they try to do it. So I'll just say a few quick words about that. Solidarity. In the text, which you can read afterwards, we try to focus on decision-making and the idea that our decisions should be about bringing in the broadest set of perspectives as we can, especially trying to include excluded groups. I think Nash will say some more about this when we get to him. He's really realized this is a crucial part of his purpose in his own journey and his own reflection on what he's doing. Subsidiarity is about creating freedom with responsibility, as we say, allowing people as much as possible to make decisions, but also supporting them in those decisions. So that's especially important in organizations, for instance, when we're designing work systems and jobs. But it also works at all different kinds of levels in society, between businesses and customers, for instance. And then we have two principles which are a little bit more fine-grained, if you like. Whereas solidarity and subsidiarity may be big business organizational principles, reciprocity and plurality are much more about the day-to-day interactions between people. Reciprocity about building trust, fundamentally. Trust starts in personal relationships, only then can be scaled up to bigger levels. And especially important, reciprocity and trust, where we have asymmetry, and if we think about some of the countries you're from, perhaps Raymond and Valentina will bring this up, we often have a lot of asymmetry between the power of businesses and the power of their employees or their customers. And if we're going to build trust, we have to do it person by person in relationship between those different groups in society. Plurality is a word you don't hear so much today. We hear diversity usually. The idea of plurality is that it's diversity in relationship. Diversity can often be a very individualistic thing. You are who you are, I am who I am, I let you be what you are, and you let me be what I am. Whereas plurality is much more about bringing into relationship these things, knowing who you are and not changing who you are just because someone is different from you, but bringing that difference into a relationship, a dialogue with each other, and growing and learning and bringing about innovation through that. Sustainability is a principle that we all know very well. And since I think it's a good idea if we move on, I will stop there, I think, and hand back to Loughlin.
Thank you, Helen. I think what joins Helen and I is our desire that we wanted to accelerate people beyond all of our decades of learning. And I'd like to invite Nash, who we see as the next super accelerator, to talk about how he sees he's built on our decades of learning and is super accelerating them. So Nash.
Thank you, Loughlin and Helen. I'm sure you guys have heard this expression, standing on the shoulders of giants. And that's where I feel I am. I feel that there has been tremendous thought and study and investigation into what are the principles, as Loughlin talked about, the design principles, this behavioral framework, all of this stuff is already there. And Helen has cited books, and I know that there's so much that's gone behind. So it's not that the Blueprint has created this, it's that they have somehow brought this together. And I felt that my work was to bring together the thinking that I perceived through the Blueprint, and to then be able to translate that to the entrepreneurs that I get to work with. My background was in investment banking. I spent 10 years there, and I would best summarize how I felt about that by saying to you that after the initial period of the kind of illusion of success that came about by wearing a flash suit and walking around a Canary Wharf and feeling like I had somehow made it, after that kind of illusion wore off after a year or so, I started to increasingly feel that that I was part of a problem and not part of a solution. And that sense that I was part of a problem kept on eating away at me, and it ate away at me for the whole 10 years that I spent there, until eventually I decided that I needed to, that I wasn't actually trapped by the system, that I was creating this sensation, and that I had this opportunity to leave and to start something new. And that was back in 2012 when I left the investment banking world. And I would say that when I left, I really didn't have a clear sense of what I wanted to do, but I did have a sense of what I didn't want to do. And that was enough. That was enough to say no to something and yes to the possibility. But obviously I was fortunate and had worked hard and long to be able to create myself a financial buffer in order to then be able to take stock of what it is that I really wanted to do and figure out how I would make that happen. And the blueprint and others have been instrumental in helping to shape my thinking. And today what I do is I work with the CEOs and exec teams of fast growth companies, mostly in the tech sector, and I help them to develop as purpose-led and performance-driven companies. I see that there's this tremendous focus, as I mentioned earlier on product and on investment readiness, but I see that there's this huge part of the equation, which, as I described earlier, I think relates to organizational health, which is not really treated in a direct way, not in a systematic way. I think people dip in and out of it. I see a lot of people talking, oh, we have a people team, or we have an HR department or whatever. And this just seems to scratch the surface, because we've been talking about business as a human system. And in my perspective, business is a human system. As Loughlin described, it is nothing more than a group of people coming together with their discretionary effort to achieve something that on their own they wouldn't be able to achieve. It's voluntary. We're not often forced into business. We choose to go that way. We choose which businesses we want to work for and which ones we don't. And so there's an element of discretionary effort in that. And so what that means to say is, at the base of business as a human system, for me, at least in the way that I've understood it or that I apply it, is to say, what are the drivers, the fundamental drivers that are unique to all human beings? It doesn't matter if you're Japanese or Spanish or British or Indian, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter if you're 90 or 19. What are the factors? What are the forces that just drive us as a species? What are the common drivers of human behavior? And I think when I speak to people in business about that, there's a sense that people are very complicated and that they're very hard to understand. And I think to some extent, I think we can all relate to that. But I also think that there are certain factors that drive all of us to achieve the best version and to be the best version of ourselves. And I've summarized that as three things, which are the desire to be in meaningful relationships. Helen and Loughlin already talk about that. So we all desire to be in rich relationships, I think. And there's also a desire for mastery. There's a desire to be the best version of ourselves. Nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, how can I do a lousy job today? That's just not how we're wired typically. And if people are doing a lazy job, then you have to question the conditions within which they're operating. So I think invariably there is a desire to do the best and to be a master at something. And then there's also this deeper desire that we have for contribution. The desire to actually achieve something that's not just in service of ourselves. And I think we can all probably think back to a time in our lives when we've done something that's been serving of other people, and then notice how that generates well-being for ourselves. So these are the basic principles: relationship, mastery, and a desire for contribution, around which I built the business as a human system. And so from there, I've been creating a method which is called the High Impact Culture Method. It's based in these three pillars of organizational purpose. Why do I exist as a company? Why do we exist? What's our collective meaning? And how do we translate that into our strategy? Clarity, which is all about where are we going and how are we going to measure success? And also, are the decisions that we take aligned with our identity? And then health, which is to do with the dynamics of a high-performing team. What does it take to actually build a high-performing team? And so in this, whoever did the slide change, that was perfect timing. In this evolution, I'm realizing that my purpose in business is to accelerate business for human well-being, giving opportunity for everybody, the underprivileged and the excluded, to be able to contribute to humanity's greatest challenges. And so I see that there's two parts to this purpose. I see on one hand that I have a desire to help entrepreneurs to accelerate, as business as a force for good, to accelerate purpose-led and performance-driven businesses based on the ideas of business as a human system, and using the methodology, the high-impact culture, purpose, clarity, and health as the framework to be able to do that. And then going beyond that, in my personal experience, being a person of color and having grown up, I grew up in Switzerland, in Geneva, in a very idyllic part of the world. I spent the first 16 years of my life there. And then when I was 16, we moved to a ghettoized neighborhood in the south of London. It was an absolute, complete U-turn in the direction of my life. And I came into that scenario with certain prejudices about people and people from different socioeconomic backgrounds to the one that I was from. And in the end, while that was a really challenging and trying time, what I realized is that I connected on a human level with people with whom I would never otherwise have connected. And then there was something about human reciprocity and human connection that went way beyond class and race and all of the other things that divide us. And I found comfort in the people's homes, people who I never thought I would otherwise have connected with. And that had a profound impact on me. And so part of the vision and part of the purpose is, yes, I would like to inspire 1 million startups and scale-ups to operate as purpose-led and performance-driven companies. But I only see that as part of the vision. The other part is to dial in the underprivileged and the excluded, particularly youths of color, who are often structurally excluded from privilege, and provide them with a vehicle of entrepreneurship as a vehicle to be able to climb out of negative social and economic disparity and negative cycles, and also to tap into that desire that each person has, once their survival needs are taken care of, to be able to contribute to something greater than themselves. It was once described to me that in the animal kingdom, if the animal has an empty stomach, he has one problem. And if he has a full stomach, the animal has no problems. And in the human situation, if the human being has an empty stomach, he also has one problem. But if he has a full belly, a full stomach, then he has 100 problems. Essentially saying that what it means to be a human begins when our survival needs are taken care of. And so I see very much that entrepreneurship can be a vehicle for helping the underserved to overcome their social and economic challenges, and then to tap into those deeper levels of meaning and fulfillment, what it ultimately means to be a human being. And so I see part of this as, I'll be brief, but I see part of this as something that I can achieve through business, which is really the acceleration of businesses, the vision that's described on that page. And then the part about working with the underserved and the excluded, I see that almost as a foundation, as an NGO, which would be married to the business, which would be in some way funded and supported by the business. And that's the direction in which I'm in. Right now, I'm in the process of trying to put together an accelerator program, which is focused not in product and technology and investment readiness, but focused in organizational health.
Thank you, Nash. Thank you. That's very interesting. And at this point, I would like to open it up also to our young participants to see whether they have any questions for any of our three speakers.
Hi, guys. I'm Valentina from Chile. And first, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your time and life with us. It's an honor to be with you here. I'm thinking about when I was hearing you, the three of you. I was thinking about about the letter that the Pope Francis sent us to us to collaborate with him into giving back the soul of the economy today, and also to each one of the young people who were invited and who have joined us in this journey. In this letter, the Pope Francis invited us to look at Saint Francis of Assisi and the way he's related with the people, with the creation, with the society, and also considering his call from Laudato Si. And I'm thinking about this, and in our village, and in Laudato Si, I'm thinking about that we can find three dimensions about it. One is the sense of reality, the sense of citizenship, and also a call for a conversion. The name of our village is Vocation and Profit of the Economy of Francesco. So we're not a village, we're villagers with a purpose, with a common mission to serve the society. In the same way, we also believe that everything is connected, right? And each person is someone, not something, that will say Loughlin before. We walk with the history and through it, learning from the past, taking the challenges we are facing in the present and projecting into the future with the lights and with the shadows. We walk, each one of us, together from the value of our own identity and originality, culture, modes of governments, different economy models and experience, with the different generational ages and the diversity of knowledges and personal vocation, and also the proposal of the Helen said the proposal of the is the vocation of the business, and it's related with the rest of the creation. Thinking now about blueprint and Nash, you said business is a human system with a purpose. And I see this invitation consider this three elements that in Laudato Si we have been talking before: the sense of reality, the sense of citizenship, and the conversion, and how is integrated in this process. Where first you said you have a change in the mentality of the people, and then this change of the mindset reflected in the people's behavior, and then goes in a positive change in the business world, with an aim of contributing to the common good of society. So here's my question. What have been the challenges that you have experienced to create this new mindset of relationship, and what you have been the best practices that you can share with us?
Thank you, Valentina. I think I probably need a day to answer that. It's such a wonderful question. So thank you, because it takes so many things into account. But let's start with business. And as you correctly said, mindset. The point about mindset in business, and I'm going to extend it beyond business because I think that's important, is we have basically two groups of people in any system that has been formalized and has tradition and is conditioned, which business is. And what we have to do is to look at the groups, and what we would say is there are two groups. There are the skeptics. This is not important to me. It is not going to happen. And then there are the adopters. I really like this new idea. I'm going to make it happen. And we have to deal with both differently. For the skeptics, what we need to do is to give them evidence the expectations of them and the definition of their success is changing. So in a business context, we might talk to them through the commentary that's now coming from business, from investors, from society, from governments, to say there is a trend, and eventually this trend will land on your desk. The second thing they worry about is, will this be a drag or a burden on the business? Or will it help me perform better? So we have to deal with that by showing that having a better society and human well-being actually makes for a better business. So we deal with their skeptics. Will it happen? Yes, it will. Is it bad for performance? No, it isn't. And then they begin to move to say, I understand now, I need to deal with this because you have provided the evidence. Now let's go to the adopters. And in some ways, they are the most dangerous because they're enthusiastic, they adopt new ideas, they try, but often they fail. And if they fail, the whole change could fail too. So we have to support the adopters. And the big problem they have is they use old tools to solve new problems. So what we try to do with the adopters is to make them think again, is if you believe business is a series of relationships, if you believe the dignity of people inside the organization and outside the organization is paramount to value, would you really continue with the practices that you're doing? Would you really roll out a new way of thinking by having town halls, messages, and here is the answer? Or would you engage with smaller groups? Would you just transmit information, or would you create a community? So for the skeptics, we bring evidence. For the adopters, we bring evidence and new practices. But what we have to realize is business is part of an ecosystem. Business cannot change the world can change business. And in order to get businesses to change, we need to start to change the communities around them, the communities of society who ask questions of why can't you do this? The community of regulators this is what we think is best practice. The community of investors who start to say, here's what I demand. So this is not all about doing everything through business. It's seeing business that is influenced by changes in society. You cannot really have a systemic good business community in a country that does not have good democratic and business practices. And you cannot get change unless the community feels they are involved, they are asked, and they are part of the influence. So business and community need to change in harmony. It's not one or the other.
Thank you, Loughlin. And what about considering the current realities, diversity economy models and diversity of the citizens of each country? What suggestion can you share with us if we would like to begin today by putting the person and his dignity in the center of the economy and business world?
Can I just ask Valentina, my sense is, can we hold that question? Because I think it is linked to a really powerful question that Ramon has.
Yes.
So could we ask Ramon to ask his question, but then answer both together? Would that work?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you.
Olá, pessoal. Hello, everyone. My name is Ramon, and I live in Brazil, in Betim City, Minas Gerais. It's a pleasure to me to be here with you all. And first of all, I thought everything that was present here today was very interesting. And yes, I think it could be a good direction for creating fairer and more integral businesses. Thank you all. Loughlin, Helen, Nash, Valley, and Frank. So let's start it. I would like to know how this whole context present so far, mainly the blueprint, can contribute in practice to mitigate problems. Those are result of unfair, colonizing, epistemicida in Portuguese words, hegemonic economic model centered on economic wealth. So how could these methods not only spill over to social issues, but directly impact on these problems? When I say problems, I'm talking about very common problems for us who live in the countries of the global south. I'm talking about poverty that's not only economic poverty, but also one that limits our individual freedoms. I'm talking about social inequality. I am talking about people who may never have stopped to think about their vocation, who has to work as a way of survival and just it. In addition to these points, I would like to add two elements to this context. How to carry out this process with people being the protagonists of their lives and not mere spectators. When the focus of our actions, for example, is only on men and women in business, wouldn't we continue to disseminate the same uneven model, but with a friendlier configuration? So, secondly, as we know, many environmental and social impacts that we notice today emerge as a sequels of economic model based on self-interests. In Brazil and a lot of Latin American countries, African countries, the extractive industry is an example. We recently saw a crime caused by the mining company, Vale, unfortunately a Brazilian company in the city of Brumadinho, which murdered about 300 people, which is the mark, a violent mark of a model based on individual interests. Here, the idea that economic prosperity by itself generates general social well-being doesn't seem to be real. If it generates well-being, it's only for a few. The vast majority are still victims of the power and the will of the few. In this case, how would it be possible to align all of the social issues presented here today in industries where private interests is closely linked to a destructive social and environmental process as mining companies, oil companies, and all the kinds of organizations? How to put these points into practice in these hegemonic models of companies with old paradigms based on only on the economic growth that see people as resources or things. So these are my points, and thank you for the opportunity to share them.
I'm going to be a fool and try to say something to Ramon's point. I say a fool because you've raised some really profound issues that have even triggered an emotional side to what we're talking about here. And I thank you for bringing that so raw, straight up passion. I certainly don't have an answer to that. But what I do say is that in the there's a very simple bell curve. It's called the law of diffusion of innovation. And in that law of diffusion of innovation, it basically talks about how paradigms and technologies move across the market and how they get adopted. And the law is basically broken. The bell curve is broken into various tranches of society: the pioneers, the early adopters, the early majority, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, there are companies out there in the world who are on a extreme end of social injustice and environmental injustice. And I think that sometimes this can make us feel a little bit powerless to actually affect positive change. The law of diffusion of innovation says that we don't actually have to attract the late majority, that we just have to get to a certain tipping point, which I believe is somewhere around 15 or 18% of adoption in society of ideas, of technology before it becomes mass market. I mean, if you think about it, not that long ago, it was common to smoke on the plane or on a train platform. And nowadays it would be considered ludicrous to do such a thing. Even though there are many people who disagree with that idea, who would still like to smoke on the platform or on a plane. So it doesn't mean that everybody in society has to get on board with an idea in order for it to change. Does that make sense? So I think that we can invest our energies in those people, either skeptics or adopters that Loughlin was talking about, who show some receptivity, to the ideas instead of trying to fight against the current, because that's exhausting. Trying to convince somebody is a pointless exercise. But what we can do is ask questions of people, either the skeptics or the adopters. I have a model that I've been working on, which is about the discovery of purpose for entrepreneurial leaders. And it basically gets them to answer 4 questions. Number 1 is, what is the problem that we currently solve? So invariably, a business is already solving a problem. So the question then is, what is that problem that we're currently solving and for whom? First question. Second question is, what is the big human problem that we desire to solve? And this is when we blow it up. We look at what are the problems associated with the industry, with the sector, with the world. What are the things that move us personally? Is it environmental? Is it social? If it is social, then what aspect of social? Is it to do with ethnic minorities and not having access? Is it to do with injustice towards women, children, whatever? What are the things that move us personally as human beings? And what are the stories behind it? Because invariably there's a story behind the things that we care the most about. There's some personal connection over and above just an intellectual understanding of a problem. So what is the big human problem that we desire to solve is the second question. The third question is, are we capable? What problem are we capable to solve? So then looking at our organizational design, our capabilities, our technology, our networks, etc., and saying, which of those big human problems are we actually capable to solve? And lastly, how do we solve that problem at scale, sustainably, in a profitable way? Because profit is what sustains the social good. You mentioned at the end, about growth and how the economy is so focused on growth. It's absolutely right. And I think it was Kate Raworth, who I saw in the introductory video. She says that the modern economy has to grow whether or not it thrives. And the economy that we need is an economy that thrives whether or not it grows. And that's the macrocosm of the economic picture. But what we need to do is apply that same logic to our business. If we're thriving as human beings, if we're joyful as human beings, that means we're bringing the best of ourselves, and then we're more likely to be able to scale the common good. So I think it's a really, really hard question to answer, but that's my 2 pennies on it. Thank you, Ramon.
Well, thank you for that. And I think we're all extremely passionate about this topic, and I think that this conversation could take days. Now I understand why you did a 3-day workshop with Helen and Loughlin, because it's impossible to cover it all in just an hour and a half. And I see there are also some questions that have arrived through different channels. And I will have so many questions also from my side. So I'm just going to try to summarize a few things into one question, and then I'd ask if each of you can take a small take on it. So we had a question from the audience, Carlos Antonio, asking whether, in order to apply this and have an impact on the broader economy, he was wondering whether one should start from maybe small businesses because it's easier to impact them, or whether you start from educational institutions, or whether you start from public policy, or perhaps you need to start from everything at once. And also in relation to this, it seems to me that you have used essentially all your careers, everything you learn, to try to condense it into something that you feel it's implementable in practice. And we don't have time now to go into the details on how you implement it. But let's say if you have a suggestion or a vision for next steps for our attendees, how would you advise them to deep dive or to understand how to implement this in their own countries?
Should I do a quick answer for that? What Blueprint did was do a theory of change. What we said was, we want to make a difference at scale. So we went for large companies. The reason was We thought they can make a big difference, but also through their supply chain, they could reach out to the smaller companies. So that's why we chose them. But we took the view, in order to change them, we needed to change the leaders. In order to change the leaders, you have to change their environment, who they speak to. So we get similar CEOs together and chairs. Who they listen to. So we speak to the business schools to change the business school education. Who are they funded by? We spoke to the investors so they would change what they're demanding. Who are they influenced by? The communities in which they operate and their customers. So we work with them to provide a voice. Who are they always listening to now? Employees. So we're now providing access to employees to ask the right questions. One of the wonderful principles we think is in Blueprint, which is in the guardian for future generations, is what we need to do is to create informed citizens who can challenge business to be better. And going back to Ramon's question and Valentina's, that requires society to change and demand rather than wait for business, because sometimes business is captured or has captured the political process. And therefore we need to start something new. It's why the B Corp was started as an alternative system, not to overthrow, but to show an alternative. So I would urge everyone to understand we need to change the whole conversation and therefore think about where you can start to be part of that conversation and join up with others who will also change the conversation so that the final expectation is the same from all voices.
Thank you. And I fully agree with you that sometimes those topics can actually spark divisions, because some people say, oh, this business or this sector or everybody working in this field is bad because they're not having a good impact. And actually, maybe that's not the case. That there are actually so many people there trying to have a positive impact, but also trying to do what their job requires them to do. And so finding ways to cooperate with existing businesses and with existing institutions in order to find a way to make the system work for the greater good, but without trying to overthrow whatever already exists, can be a great way to focus on future growth and future impact, without creating divisions and controversy, but actually trying to bring on board allies. I wanted to ask just one very final note, and then I have just one very short announcement regarding the future webinars. But Sister Helen, business is a human system is part of the title today. So I just wanted to ask you if you have any closing remarks on this topic and why the human is also so important within this topic.
Well, I think that this is our key starting point, and it has to be for the economy of Francesco, and it is for Blueprint. And we heard Loughlin talking about it before. You hear someone dressed like me, coming from a wisdom tradition, like the Christian tradition. We need to have a lot of different voices, because if we're going to build a human system in business, we need all those different human voices helping us to make that system really human, because humanity is so diverse, and Valentina was talking about that. There's so much richness and depth in human experience. We need a sort of skeleton of basic ideas, which is what Blueprint is trying to put together. But then all of our experiences are so diverse that we need to have a way to share that richness in this good sense, while we don't forget this terrible misuse of the power of business that Raymond reminded us about. And we definitely want to keep that in mind and be trying to contrast that too.
Yes. And I think this is also, you summarize very well the broader economy of Francesco goal of trying to bring together people, both change makers, economists, and entrepreneurs from all around the world trying to understand what can we do together in order to shine a light on these topics and find ways to have a positive impact. And speaking of this, actually, I just wanted to mention that there will be some future EOF on live seminars. The next one is on July 17th at 4 p.m. Central European Time. There will be a conversation with JC Cardenas and Caruso on peace economics, so good practices, issues, and challenges. And then also the School of Civic Happiness is happy to announce the webinar with the title Global Happiness. Sorry, I'm just reading because they gave me these notes from the central organization. So Global Happiness, hosting Dr. Vandana Shiva on Monday, July 13th at 3:30 p.m. Central European Time. And all those events will be streamed on the YouTube channel of the Economy of Francesco. And with all of that said, I wanted to thank again each and every one of you, and also all the volunteers that we didn't get to see today on stage, but there are many. There are those translating, those helping us manage the Zoom channel and the questions, and all the other volunteers of the Economy of Francesco. So thank you all. Thank you, Loughlin, Nash, Helen, Valentina, Ramon, and thank to all of our attendees. We look forward to see you soon. And in the meantime, have a great weekend. Thank you again. Goodbye.